Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and submit your question for a future episode. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. Answering the first question is a guy you might know by the name of Nathan Drake from Reawaken Hymns. Take it away, Nathan.
Hey everybody, as Spencer said, I'm Nathan Drake. Today I'm going to answer a question from Sophia F. So Sophia asks, I'm a brand new worship leader. I'm a mom of 6 and homeschool. I'm very busy. Yes, you are very busy. I play keys and sing. And initially I hated the idea of playing along with multitracks, but felt it was needed as I don't have a full band, usually just keys and acoustic guitar. But now I am dependent on them. Should I try to do more songs without the tracks? Is it phony to use them? Is simple, just keys and acoustic, okay, even for bigger, faster songs? That is a great question, Sophia, and I think it's a question that a lot of small worship bands struggle with now, because multitracks are incredibly prevalent, and small churches make up most of the churches in the U.S., yet most of the resources I've seen for using multitracks deal with larger churches, so there's not a lot of resources for small churches and how to use multitracks well. So thanks for asking this. I think it's a question that a ton of small churches have. So the far too simple answer, I would say, is that multitracks are simply a tool. So if they help your congregation sing better, use them. If they don't help your congregation sing better, don't use them. Obviously, there's a lot of details and nuts and bolts that go into that, but I think that is at the base. That's the crux of the issue. Because corporate worship is about your church singing together. That's the goal of corporate worship. Obviously, the goal of worship itself is to glorify God, but the goal of corporate worship, as opposed to other sorts of worship, is for the church to sing together. So if multitracks help your church do that, use them. And if they don't. So one thing you mentioned is that you are dependent on them now. I see that a lot. That's very common once people start using them. I would encourage you to try to not be dependent on them. That sounds strange, but try not to be dependent on multitracks. I've seen it go both ways. I've worked with churches where it goes both ways. Either they use multitracks and have to use multitracks or else they can't play. Or the other way, they don't use multitracks and they don't know how to use multitracks and can't play with multitracks. I don't think either of those are the best ideal situation. I think that flexibility of being able to use multitracks when they fit the situation and not use them when they don't is very important. It gives you more flexibility in your worship planning and allows you to be more creative in your worship planning. I was in a situation where I worked in a church that had to use them, and I wanted to do acoustic weeks for the sermon series coming up because it fit well. And we couldn't. They couldn't play without clicks and cues, and it really limited what we could do. And unfortunately, in that way, it hindered our worship services. You also ask, is it phony to use them? And I think this is a real and legitimate concern with a lot of small bands, because it almost feels like maybe you're singing along to like a karaoke track, or there's instruments that are playing that aren't really there, and it just seems phony or fake or not real. So when I'm leading with a small band and using multitracks, say it's just me, or it's just me and a piano player and me and a percussion player, what I'll often do is use the tracks minimally to try to reduce distractions to the congregation. And I usually don't use any instruments that aren't on stage already, or that aren't background instruments in the song. So what I mean by that is, if it's just me and a piano player, say, I won't use the drum kit on the tracks, because a drum kit is an obvious instrument to everyone, and they'll know that they can hear a drum kit and there's not one on stage. And I think sometimes that can be distracting to people. Another obvious instrument is electric guitar. Not all electric guitar, sometimes it's ambient or sometimes it's just clean strums, and those are kind of background. But if it's a distorted part, a lead part, a big electric guitar part, that's another one that people can probably pick out and see that it's not on stage and can become a distraction. Any big, large synth parts or piano parts, same thing. So those are obvious instruments, upfront instruments that people can pick out in their ears and then see they're not on stage. And I think that can become a distraction. I will use instruments that are more in the background and that most non-musicians in the congregation can't necessarily pick out. Synth pads is a big one. Bass guitar, depending on what it's playing, bass guitar can also often be a background instrument. Electric pianos playing chords, organs playing chords. Sometimes percussion like shakers can be background, or sometimes it can be obvious. You'd have to make that determination yourself. So that's what I do, because those things will fill in the sound without being distracting to the congregation, because they won't be like looking for the pads playing, because that's a pretty common thing to exist, and some people just ignore it. Bass guitar that's in the background, same thing. Not a lot of people necessarily will be looking for the bass guitar. The musicians will, of course, but they're distracted anyway. So, but most people won't be searching for that. So I'm filling out the sound without adding distractions. And then the other thing is I will use instruments that are already on stage. Important disclaimer, do not replace your musicians with tracks. I think a big portion of the bad stigma of tracks with worship bands is worship leaders using the tracks to literally replace the musicians that are on stage. And if you want a really quick way to make your worship team feel unappreciated, replace them with tracks while they're standing on stage. Don't do that. Please don't do that. What I mean is, if there are tracks that complement that person that's on stage, use them. An electric guitar is a good example. A lot of modern multitracks have like 80 electric guitar parts. So have your electric guitar player pick out the parts he wants to play, mute that on the track so it's not competing with him, but then fill in with other parts. There might be whole strums, there might be other things that will help him sound bigger and fill in the electric guitar sound. Keys, same thing. You might have a piano player. You could also add in maybe the electric piano from the tracks, or a synth, or the pads, because that will just fill in what the keyboard player is already playing. So don't replace your musicians with tracks. Fill in the sound behind them. And if they're on stage, then people won't question and be distracted by, why is there an electric guitar part when there's no electric guitar player? Because there is an electric guitar player. And probably only musicians and guitar players like myself will realize that electric guitar player isn't playing all those parts. But again, musicians are distracted anyway, so it doesn't really matter, does it? So that's how I would typically use tracks with a smaller band. A couple notes. If you're playing by yourself and you don't feel like you are filling out the sound yourself, you're unhappy with that sound, and you're using tracks to kind of fill it out, I think you're probably still going to be unhappy with how it sounds. I think you need to be able to fill out the sound yourself. Like if you're just on acoustic or just on piano and singing, try to make it so that you can fill out the sound yourself, be happy with how it would sound without any tracks, and then use tracks to add in a bit more. Because honestly, tracks aren't going to replace what you're doing. So if you're unhappy with what you're doing, I don't think tracks are going to fill in enough for you to think, oh, now this sounds amazing. So if you're using them minimally and you're happy with how you sound without them, some people might be saying, well, why are we using them at all? I would say there's two reasons. One, it will fill out your sound. Even though you might be happy with how it sounds without them, it will fill out the sound. And I mean, if you picture a spectrum, say 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, you just playing on acoustic and singing are only going to be a small portion of that. Professional recordings do try to fill in a lot of that spectrum to make it sound full. So you have pads and synths and bass and stuff filling in parts of the sonic spectrum that you are not existing in as a solo musician, and it will help fill out the sound. And another benefit is the clicks and cues that are in your ear. This is especially helpful for small bands that have very busy volunteers that don't have time to learn a bunch of songs every single week because they play every single week. Having that click helps everybody stay together. Again, don't be dependent on it, but it helps everybody stay together. And those cues are kind of like having a band director in your ears without having to have a band director. So everybody stays on the right part. Nobody's going to the chorus at the wrong time unless they're literally not listening to the cues in their ears. So those clicks and cues can be a huge benefit in and of themselves to small teams. So the final part of your question is simple, just keys and acoustic, okay, even for bigger, faster songs? And I addressed this a little bit before, but let me just make it clear. 1000% yes. Yes, it is. In fact, I love it. This is something that I've seen as a bigger issue in churches than in the rest of the world for some reason. I grew up an emo kid in the late 90s, early 2000s, and something that was really popular back then was those Punk Goes Acoustic albums. It was just punk bands playing acoustic versions of their songs. They were rocking out fast punk songs on just acoustic guitars, and it sounded awesome. And I love those. Another one of my favorite musicians is Ben Folds. Content warning if you listen to him. Ben Folds, he is a piano player and singer if you don't know who he is. And if you listen to his solo piano album, he does a concert with just him and a piano. You're like, how is there so much energy? How is this man putting out so much energy with just a piano and himself? So yes, 100%, you can play fast songs, you can play big songs, you can get energy with just an acoustic or just a piano. One thing I would advise is to pick big songs that will work on just those instruments. If you have a fast song that's driven mainly by like a RP synth part, it's probably going to be hard to replicate on acoustic. But if you find a big song that's driven more by electric guitars or pianos or real instruments, then you can translate it easier. Also, if possible, maybe just find a beginner drummer who can just play like a shaker or a cajon on stage. Those are fairly simple instruments for a beginner drummer. And if you can find that, you can add a lot of energy with just a shaker. People are amazed by how much energy a shaker will add. It's like my favorite instrument. People are like, it's just a little shaker. It doesn't add anything. Huge difference. Add a shaker, it adds a ton of energy and a ton of interest to your music. I promise. Cajon does the same thing. I lead on solo acoustic all of the time, and I play fast songs. As I said, I come from the Punk Goes Acoustic era, so I guess I'm probably more used to that. But yeah, solo acoustic, I play fast songs all the time, and I really like how it sounds. If you're not used to playing fast songs on just acoustic or just piano or just a small band, maybe have some jam sessions first. Like, just get your team together for an hour some weekend night and say, hey, no agenda. I just picked out a bunch of these fast songs, and we're just going to sit down. We're just going to play them and have some fun. And just get used to playing faster songs on acoustic or piano and having that just jam session where there's no, like, thing to prepare for on Sunday. Lets people be more free and try out things and figure out how to do it without worrying about playing it well on Sunday. So that was a lot of tips. I hope it was helpful. I do have one more thing to say, and I think it's the most important. And that's just embrace who you are as a church. If you're a small church with a small team and you play a certain type of music, embrace that. I promise you that most people, and especially young people, are more concerned with you being authentic than you being radio worthy or a clone of the church down the street. A lot of young people, honestly, are sick of the show. They're sick of this fake church event they see on TV and other places. And they just want a community where they can be known, where they can be loved. And that doesn't take a show. That doesn't take a certain type of music. So just be authentic to who you are as a band. Show who you are as a church in your music. And don't try to be a worse version of the mega church down the street. Just be the only version of who you are as a church. Thank you so much for that question, Sophia. It was a great question that I think a ton of small churches struggle with. So I hope this was helpful for any small churches out there trying to use tracks in the best way possible.
Thanks so much for your wisdom and your insight, Nathan. I appreciate your answer. If you don't know who Nathan is, he runs a website/YouTube channel called Reawaken Hymns, where he takes old hymns and modernizes the chord structure so that we can play them on guitar today and still lead them in our church. So if you want to do more hymns in your church, just like I've been doing, I've been using Nathan's resources for a while now. As my church has transitioned to one service, I now do a decent amount more hymns, and I usually check out Reawaken Hymns first. So I'll leave a link to his website down below if you want some amazing arrangements of hymns done in a modern way, but still keeps the integrity of that traditional feel. A friend of mine has formed a band to play around at different churches and events. I am now a member of that band. I have noticed that on some songs, he plays the wrong chord. Example, a D when it's supposed to be an A. I tell him in all the resources for playing the song, it says A. He gets upset and says, we play it our way. Granted, moving verses and choruses or bridges or making parts longer is all right, but I have a problem with playing the wrong chords. How do I get him to understand the right chords make the song? Joe. Interesting question, because I will be upfront. my bias up front. I will disclose it. I do this sometimes. I change the chords of the songs. And so you're asking somebody who actually does this sometimes. Do I do it all the time? No. Do I seek to do it on purpose? No. But sometimes I like the way that I harmonize a song better than the way that the original person did it. And so, frankly, Joe, I think I have to disagree with you. And it really depends on what you mean by they're playing the wrong chord, because technically there's not a wrong chord. That's why jazz exists. There's not a wrong chord because we can make any chord, we can play. There's nothing that says that a chord is right or wrong. There might be chords that sound better than some others, but for every chord progression, there are probably 3 or 4 different ways that you can harmonize a chord progression. I think one of the most frequent ones that I think of, just to get into a little bit of music theory here, is sometimes in a song, instead of going back to the 1 chord, I'm thinking specifically in the key of D because this is where I usually do it. Sometimes, in some songs, instead of going back to the 1 chord, in the key of D, that would be a D chord, sometimes you can go to the 6 chord and it creates a different feeling, but it's not necessarily a wrong chord. Why is it not a wrong chord? Because all you're doing whenever you play a B minor instead of a D chord, at least the way that I play it, is you are taking off the F sharp from the D chord and you are putting a B in the bass. And so, because there are so many shared notes and depending on the melody of the song, you can harmonize a song using a B minor chord instead of a D chord. And it's going to sound fine. Either way, you will get a different feel. But I disagree with your statement that the chords make the song. I mean, I guess technically the chords make the song, but you get to decide what you want to make the song. If you want it to be in a minor key, then you play a lot of minor chords. If you want it to have that feel. For example, for Good Friday, it's kind of a down service, right? I'm thinking about this because this is the most recently that I did this. Good Friday is a down service. We did the song The Cup Was Not Removed, which probably most of you don't know. It's not that popular of a song. But it normally starts with a D. The cup was not removed. In fact, here, I will try my best to play it on piano here. So let's take the song The Cup Was Not Removed and use it as an example. You tell me which one is right or which one is wrong. This might even help you more because you probably don't even know how this song goes. But you tell me which one is right and which one is wrong. And I'll tell you which one I played at my Good Friday service. Cup was not removed, he drank it all. See him hanging there where I belong. Here's version number 2. The cup was not removed, he drank it all. See him hanging there where I belong. So, you tell me which one was right. And the answer is, it doesn't matter, because they both work. And so, because I wanted this feel, the minor feel for Good Friday, the cup was not removed, he drank it all, I played that one, where normally on Sunday I'll play D to G. The cup was not removed, he drank it all. See him hanging there where I belong. My point is this, chords make the song, but you make the chords, and you get to decide how you want the song to feel. You don't always have to do it the same way. This is why if you gave a song to one producer who was producing it for a record, they would come up with a completely different production than another producer would for that same song. So, what would I do in your situation? First of all, if it is completely the wrong chord, let's say like they're in a whole different key, and instead of playing D to G, they're going, the cup was not removed, he drank it all. So like, see him hanging there where I belong. Like like, you don't want to play that because that's obviously in the wrong key. But you can harmonize songs in different ways. So if I were you, if they are like playing an egregiously wrong chord, which I guess if you're in the key of G and they're supposed to be playing a D, but they're playing an A, then they're probably playing the wrong chord. But if you are in the key of D and they go to an A, the A chord is in the key of D still. So it's just a different harmonization. So if I were you, if they're playing the wrong chord, tell them that they are playing the wrong chord that does not sound good. Or you can say, if they're still in the same key and it's technically right, this doesn't sound right to my ear, but just because they're playing a different chord than what other people might play in that song doesn't necessarily mean that they're playing the wrong chord. So if that's how they want to play it, just play it the way that they want to play it. If they're the band leader, if they're the one making the decision, you're there to support them musically. So if they're playing an A chord, you play an A chord. I always used to tell my worship team this, and I only really half meant it. But I didn't just mean it for myself. I also told it to other worship team members who were leading a song. They said, what chord do we play here? They would turn to me because I was the band leader. I would say, listen, we're going to play whatever chord you play because you're the one leading the song. You get to decide how you want the song to go. Nobody else decides it for you. Yes, there are technically wrong chords to play, but the person leading the song gets to decide what they want the song to sound like. Doesn't mean you don't have any input, but ultimately, if you're a band member, you serve the band leader. They get to make the final decision. Now, if you want to get your worship team members in line, people like Joe. No, I'm just kidding, Joe. If you want to get your team members in line, check out the worship rehearsal blueprint. I'll link it down in the description below. In that, I will give you a step-by-step plan for your worship rehearsals that will allow you to lead your team well musically so that they do play the right chords, just like Joe talked about. But it will also help you lead them spiritually so that they're being fed from the Word of God every single time you get together, and relationally so that they grow closer to God and they grow closer to each other. So check out the worship rehearsal blueprint down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.